Well, hello and welcome to the fifth webinar of our 2026 Solar Show. Today's session is called The State of Solar Farms in Alberta. Please note that we have enabled closed captioning for this presentation. You can turn the captioning on in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll be recording this session and making it available on our website and YouTube channel following the show. My name is Heather McKenzie and I am the Executive Director at Solar Alberta. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that I'm hosting you today and working day to day from Amiskwaciwaskahegan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is located on Treaty 6 Territory and the homelands of the Otipemisiwak Métis Nation. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Bapachase, Nehewak or Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux, nations whose ancestors have cared for and nurtured these lands since time immemorial. To start, I just want to give a big shout out to Park Power for sponsoring this session today. We're super happy and grateful to have them as a sponsor. Today we'll be hearing from Jason Wang of the Pembina Institute and Margret Nellissery of Business Renewables Centre Canada. Following the presentations, there will be a question and answer period in which you can all participate. The entire session will wrap up in an hour and a half. We'll be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box, so please enter your questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation. Also, please click on the little thumbs up symbol to upvote any questions that you like. Before we move forward, we're going to do a quick poll to get a sense of who we have joining us today. Please take a minute to answer the questions popping up on your screen now. And while some are still doing the poll, I encourage you to take a minute, pop your name, land acknowledgement, any contact info that you're comfortable sharing in the chat now and throughout the event so that others can look you up on LinkedIn or email you, and hopefully we can start forming some new relationships. All right, thank you so much for participating in the poll. Just want to share those results and get a sense of who's here today. Lots of industry folks in the house. Lots of curious folks and some knowledgeable ones as well. Nice to see a couple developers here and some government reps as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all joining us. Now just a little about Solar Alberta before we dive in. Solar Alberta is now in its 35th year of operation. We're a nonprofit society that is dedicated to accelerating Alberta's transition to a just and sustainable energy future. We do so by advocating, educating, and serving as an industry and community hub for solar energy. Our membership is made up of approximately 200 individuals and 140 businesses. We also have more than 34,000 followers. We provide a number of services, including managing a solar directory through our website. In this way, we act as a bridge for installers, suppliers, and other solar-related businesses to connect with their customers and clients. Our directory gets approximately 23,000 hits each year, and you can see a link to it in the chat. There is still one more webinar available as part of the 2026 Solar Show tomorrow morning, and I hope those developers who are in attendance today are going to join us tomorrow morning. It's an industry-oriented workshop on navigating utility-scale solar in Alberta. Registration for this session can be completed through the link in the chat. There is a 10% discount for members for the workshop. At this point, we'd love to do a quick poll to find out whether you've attended any other show sessions. Please take a minute to answer the question popping up on your screen now. Thank you. And while you're filling that out, just a reminder that you can also find free archived videos of all of our previous free Solar Show sessions on our YouTube channel. And recordings from the 2026 Solar Show session will be available by the second week of February. Let's take a quick look at that poll. Okay, awesome. Great to see so many of you have been with us all week long. That's awesome. And good 33% of you joining us tomorrow morning, which makes perfect sense as it is on a related topic. Thank you so much. Throughout the year, we also run the Solar Series webinars. On February 26th, we're launching our 2026 Solar Series with a webinar called Alberta Incentive for More Business. explained. Registration is free and can be completed through the link in the chat. And as with our solar show sessions, you can find free archive videos of all those solar series webinars on our YouTube channel too. We also offer a number of classes for those in the solar industry and those transitioning into it. We recently completed our live online training series, and we're going to be offering courses again next fall. In the meantime, we have on-demand recordings of all our courses available for sale in the solar training video section of our website. This slide is particularly relevant today, given that some of the content we're going to be hearing about can get a little depressing, and we might all be thinking, what the heck can we do? So just make sure you're all aware, in addition to providing education about solar, we also advocate for it. We are currently rising up for renewables. We have free lawn signs available for pickup in 10 municipalities. We offer delivery in 8 municipalities around Alberta for free. We also have template letters for you to use on our website asking the Government of Alberta to eliminate the discriminatory rules and regulations that they have established for renewable energy. You can click on the link in the chat to please make a free sign order today or find our template letters. Solar Alberta's second annual golf tournament fundraiser will be held on June 8th, 2026 at the Inglewood Golf Club in Calgary. Tickets are available for individual golfers as well as at a discounted rate for a 4-pack. In addition, new this year, you can come to our meal if you're not a golfer, so you can still participate in part of the action. We're also looking for sponsors for this event. More details and a link to register are available through the chat. And if you're not already a Solar Alberta member, I just want to encourage you to join. Individual membership is typically $35, but it's on sale this week for 20% off. You can purchase that membership through the link in the chat. And I do send out advocacy updates to our members pretty much every month or two, so it's a good way to stay up to date on our advocacy. If you're looking to support the work that we're doing at Solar Alberta in additional ways, please consider volunteering or donating. On the topic of volunteering, we have 4 positions coming available on our board of directors. These positions will be filled at the May 6th AGM, and if you're interested in becoming a part of Solar Alberta's board and being one of my bosses, please use the link in the chat to apply by March 1st. Lastly, with your help, we are recognizing longtime dedicated contributors to solar in Alberta by gifting them a free lifetime Solar Alberta membership. If you are currently a Solar Alberta member and you know someone who's contributed significantly to the solar sector in Alberta, please consider nominating them for this award. You can find the link to the chat, the link for nomination in the chat. We're going to accept nominations till April 15th, and the award recipient will be announced at our AGM. A list of previous recipients can be found on our website. All right. I want to take this opportunity again to just thank Park Power for sponsoring today's webinar. We really couldn't offer all this amazing free content without the support of our sponsors. We are always interested in developing more partnerships for our events, so if you or your organization want to work with us to educate the public about solar or solar-related technologies, please don't hesitate to reach out. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers for the day. Jason Wang is a senior policy analyst working on the Pembina Institute's electricity program, focusing on modernizing Canada's electricity system to be more affordable, reliable, secure, and clean. He has experience with power generation and transmission and utility regulations. Jason has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Alberta and a master's in engineering and policy analysis, TU Delft. I wish I knew what that meant, Jason. You'll have to tell me after. Specializing in participatory energy modeling and planning. He previously worked with the Government of Alberta on industrial carbon pricing, offsets, and adaptation risk management. He has also worked at a pulp mill and several international energy and policy think tanks, including one that advised the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Jason. We're glad to have you here. I'm just going to introduce Margret now. Margret Nellissery is a senior analyst with Business Renewables Centre Canada, an initiative of the Pembina Institute. Her work focuses on supporting the participant community through educational materials, thought leadership, and market intelligence. Previously, she completed her master's degree in sustainable energy development from the University of Calgary. As a graduate student, she worked with the government of the Northwest Territories to formulate a climate adaptation inventory, focusing on strengthening the territory's energy and transportation system. Super excited to have you both here today. Welcome, Margret. Welcome, Jason. Now I'm going to turn the screen and mic over to Jason, and I just look forward to chatting with you all in the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather, for a great introduction. And also thanks so much for hosting this excellent event and inviting us to come and speak at it. And of course, thanks to Solar Alberta for all the work that you do throughout the year, including that advocacy piece. So today, I'm going to be walking you folks through a little state of Alberta's solar and wind markets, mostly focusing on solar, and Margret's going to present some similar overviews from the Business Renewables Center perspective as well. But if you could go to the next slide, please, Margret. Thanks for helping run my slides today, Margret. I wanted to also just begin by acknowledging the land from which our organization, Pembina Institute, is based on. We were founded in Drayton Valley, but now headquartered in Calgary on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 nations. Our organization does span the country, though, and I myself today am coming in from oh my gosh, from Edmonton, from Treaty 6 territory, from Nisqually, Wisconsin, and we acknowledge that our work, like is written here at Pembina Institute, in trying to create a more just, more sustainable future. These are also steps that are important in reconciliation, and that's a journey that's going to take not just years but several generations. So thanks. If you could go to the next slide, please, Margret. For folks who aren't familiar with the Pembina Institute, we're a nonprofit clean energy think tank and charitable entity. We advocate for strong, effective policies, and always seek for deeply collaborative approaches to research and enable credible policies that lead Canada to a clean energy future. As I said, we have offices across the country, in BC, Alberta, Ontario. If you could go to the next slide, please, Margret. And as I said, we do research, we put out lots of analysis like I'll be showing you a little bit of today, but we also have great interest in convening and bringing people together to advance these policy discussions and implementation. Our work spans several sectors, clean electricity, like I'll be talking about today, but also other forms of energy development like oil and gas, but also energy use, transportation, buildings, and we're also venturing a little bit into demand side electricity measures as well, on the distribution grid especially. So next slide, please, Margret. So yeah, today I wanted to give all of you folks a snapshot of Alberta's electricity markets, especially solar and wind development, focusing on the solar, of course. And this story is really told in three parts, essentially, what's been happening in the last 3 years. The first part is, we've seen tremendous success, which I'll talk about in this section. But the second part will be, a change in policy that's halted development. The third part is going to be how today we have continued uncertainty and what the implications of that are for our future. But starting with the success, Margret, if you could go to the next slide, please. Alberta's renewable energy sector has seen tremendous growth. since 2015, and especially since 2020. We've been leading the country in development where in recent years, nearly all development of wind and solar energy has been in Alberta. At a quick glance, in 2025, total installed capacity of wind and solar, including rooftop and other microgeneration, has actually reached just about 8 gigawatts of total installed capacity. We're just 3 megawatts shy of that, so very close to that milestone. Just one quick note, where it says wind, that's supposed to be wind. Somehow that D was lost. So, Alberta started with, our industry, this development started with already some wind capacity installed in the late 1990s and mid 2000s, but the sector really started growing towards the late 2010s. If you go to the next slide, please, Margaret. Growth in these sectors, especially in the solar sector, has been exceeding expectations. Surprising folks at the electric system operator, the government, but even us at Pembina Institute. Inspired by one of my favorite charts, we decided to compile a little look back at what expectations for solar growth in Alberta would be from the system operator in their 2017, 2019, 2021, and 2024 outlooks compared to what's actually been installed, which is in that dark blue line, the thick blue line that's operating. And in 2024, when we did this look, we compared it to the or the projects that were in development at the time. And that's changed a little bit, which I'll get into. But as you can see, development has outpaced those long-term outlooks in the past. The most recent outlook in 2024 was much more optimistic, but compared to the magnitude of what was in development, we saw as still an underestimation of the industry's momentum. Margaret, next slide, please. So go back one slide. I think we skipped one. Yeah, there we go. So with all that growth in installed capacity, what does that mean for generation, for what's actually been generated and delivered to our homes? 2025 generation data, finally, it came out just a couple of days ago, actually, from the electric system operator. And it's clear that Alberta was actually on track to meet our goal of generating 30% of all of our electricity, including industrial behind the fence generation, to be sourced from renewable energy. This is a target, the 30 by 30 goal. This is a target introduced in 2016 through the Renewable Electricity Act, and it does include wind, solar, hydro, and biomass sources. But as I said previously, most of this growth has come from wind and solar, especially since around 2019. I'll just note the 30% generation by 2030 target was introduced in 2016, but interim targets were introduced in 2019 through Ministerial Order 141 for any folks who want to look that up. It's something that I've realized is not well known across the sector. And just to note, there are no commercial geothermal electricity facilities in the province contributing to this goal. But, as you can see in this figure, all that growth has been contributing to more electricity generation from renewables than anticipated in that original target and through the interim targets as well. In 2022, we were actually 0.1% short of meeting that interim target, the first interim target set. And then last year in 2025, we reached just over 24%, just over 24% of all electricity in Alberta generated was from renewable energy sources. well surpassing our 20% interim target for 2025, excuse me. However, that momentum has nearly halted, which I'll get into in the next section. But here, just while we're talking about, what this renewable energy growth has meant for, for net contribution to the grid, for, emissions essentially as well. We're at a stage right now with tremendous uncertainty in the sector, where we're seeing projects getting canceled, but still some project development interest. There's potential for us to still meet our targets, but at the moment, it's unlikely that we will, unless policy changes are reverted back to supporting the growth in the renewable energy sector. If no more generation comes online this year, this year and into the future, and projects that are in development are delayed further or canceled, we could miss our target by as much as 7%. One of the main reasons giving me pessimism at the moment for continued project development is that at the end of 2025, we saw 10 projects with regulatory approval. So they were late stage projects that had basically, they were ready to put shovels in the ground, were canceled. So like I said, I'll get more into that. But Margaret, if you could go to the next slide, please. So following all the success, we've had a change in policy that's slammed the brakes on development in the province. Next slide, please, Margaret. As many of you folks will know, there are many layers of policy changes. Most of this started from August 2023, when the government of Alberta introduced a moratorium on project approvals for 7 months, essentially freezing development. The government then also introduced or announced that they were going to redesign the electricity market, change substantial transmission regulations, and add recycling fees. At the end of the 7-month moratorium in February 2024, the government announced several new rules for, or new restrictions for renewable energy development. And these were restrictions that, essentially only applied to the renewable energy sector. And at the time too, in 2024, were not finalized. So Margaret, if you could go to the next slide, please. What was first announced was that there would be no-go wind energy development zones close to borders and other protected areas, and that solar and wind development would be restricted on agricultural land. But it took until the end of the year, December 2024, for details about exactly what that meant to emerge. The final result that we're left with today is sort of shown in this map. I recognize it's quite a busy map, but it's the most official one that we have from the government of Alberta. And what you can see is close to the mountains and around a couple of sites in southern Alberta, some UNESCO World Heritage sites and provincial parks, and Wood Buffalo National Park in the north. There are restrictions on wind energy developments to protect what the government calls pristine viewscapes. And for the keen-eyed amongst you, you might realize that these restrictions actually go into Calgary, about the western third of Calgary. So in those areas, in the purple areas, sorry, to be clear, wind energy essentially is no longer allowed to be built. And as many of you folks know, these are some of the windiest parts of our province. Of course, there are others like east of Red Deer and north of Edmonton as well. What's shown in the orange, in both the darker orange and the lighter orange, are areas where agricultural land is considered considered to be, some of the best in the province, and any project that is built there must demonstrate its ability to coexist. Essentially, what that means is the land must be able to be, farmed again in the future, or at present, there must be coexistence with agrivoltaics, for example. Although the definitions for what that means are not entirely clear from the government. So I think these types of restrictions might be familiar to many folks. The most important thing I want to say about this is it took several months to be introduced, to be developed, to be finalized, and that entire process created tremendous uncertainty for everyone in the sector. And to this day, some of them are not finalized, which I'll get into in my last section. But if you could go to the next slide, please, Margaret. The short-term impact of all these uncertainties has led to several outcomes. One of the ones that has stood out the most to us at Pembina Institute is the net cancellation of projects in 2024 and 2025. As I showed you earlier, interest in developing renewable energy projects, especially solar, in our province has been growing faster than expected. So project developers, landowners, are coming together and taking measurements out in the field, putting business cases together at a pace that has exceeded expectations. And what we saw before 2024 was that interest was only growing. And that's sort of what's shown in the light blue here in this figure. In 2024 and 2025, what we saw was a net cancellation of projects. And what do I mean by that? So in any given year, it's normal for some projects that are proposed to be canceled. Some facilities might realize that after taking measurements from the ground, the resource potential isn't as good as it could be. And there may be several other factors for why projects are canceled, but it is normal. Projects might also become energized, and that's what we are showing in the red here at the bottom. So from what the Alberta Electric System Operator lists in its development queue, essentially a list of all of what we consider to be interest in development, it is normal to see projects become energized and leave that queue. But in 2024 and 2025, which isn't shown here, what we saw is fewer proposals, just in general, but then more cancellations occur than those proposals. In 2025, we actually essentially saw nearly no proposals in wind and solar. So the development queue is actually now, like the magnitude of the development queue of interest in developing wind and solar energy in Alberta, it's actually at its lowest since July 2021. And I think Margaret's going to talk a little bit more about this type of trend, this type of effect a bit later in her section. But if you could go to the next slide, please, Margret. I want to talk a little bit more about the continued uncertainty from the government of Alberta. One of the factors that's been hurting development is these new transmission rules that are being developed. And as I said, they were announced in 2023, but the final rules are supposed to come any day now. I haven't checked this morning, so if they have, please excuse me on that, but they were supposed to be released in January. Those rules, again, I think Margret will talk a bit more about those and what they mean, but they are substantial to developers making final investment decisions, or developers and their investors making final investment decisions to proceed with projects. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Margret. What we're seeing now at the end of 2025 is the total magnitude of canceled projects in Alberta, projects that had probably already, like I said earlier, proceeded to the point where at least data was being collected. They were at least somewhat serious projects that there was a developer behind. There were conversations about financing. A total of over 11 gigawatts now, close to 13 actually, have been canceled since the introduction of Alberta's Renewables Moratorium in 2023, and the introduction of all the other barriers that have been introduced. This is a magnitude of projects that, if they were all producing electricity at the same time at full capacity, which, to be clear, probably wouldn't happen, for it to be tremendously windy and sunny. But if they had, they would have been able to power Alberta's entire grid. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that has stood out to us too is in just the end of 2025 is that we're not just seeing projects that were earlier in their development processes canceled, but in November and December at the end of 2025, we saw 10 late stage projects that already had approvals be canceled. And these were projects that totaled to about 1.5 gigawatts in capacity, or $2 billion worth of investments that were probably just about to be decided upon if they were going to go ahead or not. And unfortunately, all of them decided to not proceed. If you go to the next slide, please, Margret. I'm unfortunately essentially ending on a down note, and maybe Margret will pick us back up. But development in Alberta is definitely on a downward trend. New proposals, like I said, have slowed down tremendously to nearly none in 2025. We're seeing continued uncertainty. Compared to other regions, though, this is what I think makes me the most concerned. At least as of early 2025, we were seeing the project development queues, the interest in developing new wind and solar projects in places like Texas and in South Australia continue to rise. And of course, a lot changed in the United States the last couple of months, but a preliminary glance, at least at Texas, is that development interest is continuing to grow. Within just Canada, other provinces are starting to realize the importance of wind and solar to their electricity grids. When at the beginning of the presentation, I said that Alberta was leading Canada in development over the last couple of years. And part of that, to be honest, was because other provinces weren't inviting wind and solar development, unfortunately. But British Columbia, Saskatchewan, even Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, essentially every region in Canada right now is welcoming new renewable energy development through procurements and through other policy changes that are welcoming these projects, welcoming that investment. And so in Alberta, where we're seeing the opposite trend and tremendous potential for continued development, because according to our modeling and other analyses, our grid is far from saturated from renewables. There may be challenges in integrating wind and solar generation, like we're seeing congestion in southern Alberta right now, but these are all issues that can be resolved and should be resolved if we want to build the most affordable, reliable, and sustainable electricity grid. So Margret, if you go to the last slide, please. In summary, as I said, Alberta was leading the country in renewable energy development. Unfortunately, we've seen several layers of policy and regulatory changes that have had the outcome of essentially halting project development. But while uncertainty continues because many of these changes are still not finalized, there still is some interest in the market. We still have amongst the best wind and solar resources in the country, and we still have investors who, developers. We still have developers who have already made progress on starting new projects. And if Alberta can recognize that wind and solar have a tremendous role, an important role to play in building, as I said, an affordable and reliable grid, we can hopefully turn the trend around. So with that, thank you. Margaret, if you just go to the next 2 slides, please, quickly. Go back one. We are a charitable entity, so if you're interested in learning more about what we do or supporting our work, please take a look at the website. And if you go to the next slide, Margaret. I've left my contact information as well as my colleague Will's contact information here, or our emails. Will has been one of my collaborators in doing much of this analysis. He's also a senior analyst in our electricity program. And both of us are happy to chat with anyone at any time about the state of our market or anything else related to electricity in Canada or in Alberta. And if you are interested in joining our newsletter, there's a link there for that too. So with that, I'll hand it over to Margret.
Hi. Sorry, I was just taking some time to switch on my camera. Thank you so much, Jason. Well, you really ended us on a cliffhanger there. And I'm going to try to address that a little bit in this section. I'll be talking about how we could unlock Alberta's solar potential through PPAs. Just navigating the slides as we speak. So before I get into it, I want to introduce our team a little bit. So we are the Business Renewables Centre Canada, and we are an initiative of the Pembina Institute, which means we are we work with them, we collaborate, and we do analysis together as well. But we are a multi-sided community, and we comprise of renewable energy buyers. These are organizations that would want to purchase renewable energy, and we have renewable energy developers, and these are those folks that sell energy. And we also have intermediaries like law firms, risk advisories, financial experts that assist and provide training to our buyers and developers. And what we do is we provide education, market intelligence, and facilitate knowledge mobilization in everything around PPAs. So for a renewable energy buyer, we help them by providing knowledge about PPAs within their company, evaluate if a PPA is a suitable tool for them, and we ensure that all the tools are necessary when they are talking to renewable energy developers. And on the developer side, we help them understand what concerns buyers are facing, and we help them get connected to interested buyers. Currently, we have a little over 50 participants across various industries and of different sizes. And something that we are proud of is that 90% of all PPA deals in Canada is done by a BRC Canada participant. To those on call that might be a little confused about what a PPA is, how it works, I want to give a quick intro into the topic before I delve more into it. So corporate companies and organizations use renewable energy to help reduce their emissions. When it comes to indirect emissions from a company's needs, energy needs, for example, their scope 2 emissions, the most common mechanisms used are on-site and off-site procurement. And at BRC, we help facilitate off-site procurement. Now, off-site procurement, this is when an energy buyer purchases wind or solar from a developer, a generating project that is not located on their property. The buyer does not receive actual electricity produced by these generators. Instead, the transaction happens on paper, which is where the term virtual comes from, in virtual power purchase agreements or VPPAs. So if you look at this figure, the non-utility buyer continues to power its operations with the electricity from the grid, and the developer supplies the grid with the electricity that they generate. The buyer receives the environmental attributes associated with the renewable energy, and the virtual nature of this agreement is what allows organizations to meet their renewable energy targets without the complexity of physically altering how their operations are powered. PPAs also benefit developers as well, because these agreements are what help them receive a reliable long-term revenue that enables project financing. Well, the key point I want to kind of make here is that PPAs help the deployment of renewable energy projects. Overall, through this mechanism, renewable energy buyers are helping enable additional renewable energy capacity. So in the graph that Jason showed earlier, how there was an uptick in renewable energy capacity back in 2020, 2021, a big contributor of that were PPAs. So I want to talk a little bit about the lasting impacts of renewable energy projects in general. And then I have those tiny notes there to show you from specific solar projects what the benefits were. So here, just to be clear, I'm talking about the benefits of projects that were enabled through PPAs. So collectively, these projects have driven around 7.6 billion in investment and supported over 7,000 jobs at peak construction in Alberta. And when only looking at solar, PPA-backed solar projects have enabled around 2.1 billion in investment and around 3,000 jobs during construction. Projects enabled by PPAs alone have generated 30.8 million in municipal tax revenues in various municipalities across the province. And when you narrow it down to solar, that is around 11.8 million in tax revenues generated by PPA-backed solar projects. We'll be talking a little bit more about this in the later sections. The projects produce over 12 terawatt hours of energy annually, enough to power 1.7 million homes in the province. That's almost all the homes in Alberta. And looking at solar alone, that's over 370,000 homes that can be powered with the energy produced through solar-backed PPAs. And looking at the environmental aspect as well, solar-backed PPAs have avoided 1 million tons of emissions, and using the carbon, the benchmark right now, the $95 per ton, that's almost 99 million in avoided emissions value just from solar-backed PPAs. I wanted to cover the benefits of PPAs and how they've been helping renewable energy get deployed before I moved on to a little bit of a downer. So this is BRC Canada's deal tracker. It's one of our most valued resources. Here we track every publicly announced solar and wind PPA deal in the country, mostly Alberta, because that's where it could have happened up until early last year. In total, PPAs have contracted, have enabled 4.1 gigawatt of capacity in the province. And looking at solar, PPAs have enabled 1.5 gigawatts of solar projects in Alberta. And these are the projects that drove the benefits we discussed just in the previous slide. But unfortunately, the last 2 years were not a strong year for deals. We got only one deal in Alberta in 2025, and that is the 6 megawatt deal right at the bottom of the graph. This was from a new industry that came into our deal tracker, the carbon dioxide removal industry. The green you see on the 2025 bar is the only other deal to come through last year, and this was more of a breakthrough. We added a new province to the tracker, that is Nova Scotia. We've all been kind of waiting to add a new province to our deal tracker, so we're quite excited about that. So Nova Scotia, through their Green Choice program, Nova Scotia Power enabled the offtake of 262 megawatt of wind power. The wind projects are co-owned by the Mi'kmaq communities and would be providing power to various large-scale electricity consumers through the GCP program. This is just a little bit of a teaser to show that, kind of like what Jason mentioned earlier, other provinces are, slowly opening up to renewable development. And to that point, we also saw another deal emerge from Saskatchewan, which is, again, the first time it's happening there. A deal between KNS Potash Canada and George Gordon Development, an indigenous-owned developer, for a 32 megawatt solar project. We haven't included that on our deal tracker because we're waiting for some of the details to become publicly available. So the benefits from PPAs are pretty clear. There have been numerous projects that have been deployed through PPAs in Alberta in the last few years. But what's been happening, right, in the last, in 2024 and 25? Why did we experience such slow years? To add on to what Jason mentioned, for over 2 years now, there has been significant regulatory and policy upheaval that has frozen the market in Alberta. Just looking at our deal tracker, it shows that announced corporate PPAs have dropped by almost 99% in the last 2 years. This mostly started this policy stuff, like Jason mentioned, it started back in August 2023 with the 7-month moratorium on renewable energy project approvals. And it was followed with uncertainty related to land reforms, which was mostly resolved in 2025. But this again bled into a full overhaul of the electricity market called the restructured energy market, the policies under that, as well as changes to the transmission policy. These issues, these impacts that kind of follow these policy changes, impact how renewable energy projects can be built. It affects how they should integrate with the grid, how project fees and bidding processes and PPAs work, and how transmission is managed. We have put a full timeline of everything that has happened since 2023 in our latest annual report earlier this week. So if you want to see exactly how complex this whole process is, I really suggest giving it a look. So I want to talk about how these policy issues have been impacting PPAs. The increased or the growing uncertainty in the project detail, in the policy details, are really important to investment decisions. So it's still unclear how investors can accurately model the financials of renewable energy projects in Alberta. The uncertainty with the additional new costs through regulatory and capital costs can also impact how projects are built and how these deals can happen. So project costs and all these uncertainty impacts the PPA contracts because either the renewable energy developer or the buyer, they will need to shoulder some additional risk, some additional market risks specifically. So with all of this, it's a little difficult for participants to get into deals right now. What we're observing is because of this, there's been such a slowdown of deals in the last 2 years. But like we mentioned a little bit earlier, there are other provinces opening up to the PPA mechanisms. We actually did a report called Powering Corporate Choice, which details the design considerations that each province should consider when creating programs to unlock private investment. But again, this is something that it's unfortunate for Alberta. Okay, so I'm gonna turn up the positivity dial a little bit now, and move the conversation to demand. Even though the market has been on a standstill the last 2 years, the PPA market, through conversations with stakeholders, participants, and others, we've been hearing that even though there's so much uncertainty, there is still demand among renewable energy buyers. But at BRC, our team wanted to know the extent of demand from Canadian companies. So we know that Scope 2 emissions target set by corporations and other organizations is what actually drives corporate procurement. So we wanted to translate this emission reduction targets into renewable energy demand. So when we did this project, we looked at the corporate sustainability targets, specifically the Scope 2 targets of the top 100 Canadian corporations. And we found out that in order for these companies to meet their climate targets, they would need 7.7 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. That is enough energy to power more than 1.9 million homes in Canada. So you can find this research on our website at BRC Canada. It was surprising, but it was also relieving to see that there is demand. Like it's not drying up, even though there is so much uncertainty. So we did this analysis for each province to see how much demand is there in each province. When companies operate their manufacturing facilities, offices, or other operations, they have these, these buildings or these facilities in different provinces or different locations, separate from their headquarters. So we kind of analyzed each province where each of these companies would be located to understand where exactly the demand is coming from. And we found out that Alberta has 1.4 gigawatts of demand that needs to be met by 2035. And this is 19% of the national total. Obviously, like the highest demand was from Ontario because a lot of the manufacturing facilities and operations are based there. But in Alberta, most of the demand that you see on the graph, it's driven by the oil and gas industry, more than 70% of the demand. And looking at when these companies need to meet their target, in Alberta, the target year ranged from 2025 to 2035. So that is, these companies need to meet more than 1.4 gigawatt of demand. They need to meet this to achieve their stated emission reduction target through PPAs. The PPAs is a tool or a mechanism to help them reduce this. Given the policy overhaul and uncertainty in the renewable energy industry, the obvious question is, do we have supply? We know there's demand in the province, but do we have supply? Looks like we do, and it's mostly all solar. So this chart, this graph, it's a little bit of a good news and a bad news. So the chart shows the volume of construction-ready solar projects in each quarter. The dark yellow are newly constructed projects added at the top, and the shaded projects leaving the bottom. From the bottom are projects that have completed construction. We can see that last year, we did not see many projects completing construction, and that reflects Jason's analysis. And while some projects became newly construction ready early on, in the second half of last year, there was no projects that were added as newly construction ready. In fact, in December last year, a bigger wave of project cancellations came towards the end, which reduced the amount of construction-ready projects first time in the solar construction queue. So that's a little bit of bad news, but we still see more than 2.6 gigawatts of solar supply. Want to show this graph in a little bit of a positive light because the demand that I spoke about earlier. So this, we do have supply. We do have, as in not supply, as in we have construction-ready projects that are ready for buyers to get into PPAs with. And once the policy is clear, when there's more certainty in the space, these solar projects would be available for them. So, yeah. I'm towards the end of my section, and I really wanted to highlight something. And this is indirectly related to PPAs, but this is a piece that BRC Canada, we started working on the year the moratorium started. We wanted to actually understand the real impact of renewable energy projects in the province. And for this, we connected with municipalities and we calculated the amount of municipal tax revenues solar and wind projects generated to counties and municipalities across the province. In 2020, we've been doing this for 3 years, and our latest report that was released in 25, we saw that wind and solar projects generated 70.6 million in municipal tax revenues across 26 municipalities. And from this, 20 million was from only solar projects spread across 20 municipalities. To drive this impact, to really highlight what a big impact this is for municipalities. This revenue, this is over 10, 20, or even for some municipalities, over 30% of their total operational revenue. And that is a huge chunk of their revenue that that they're receiving from renewable energy projects. In the latest fact sheet that was released in 2025, you can find it on our website. You can see that we also did an analysis to check how much revenue municipalities have lost because of project cancellations. To give an idea, just to show the impact of these projects. So I really recommend checking out this piece to help you understand the impact of renewables. And with that, I just want to conclude, like how we started. I spoke about the demand. There is demand across the province, and there is supply especially from solar. We did talk a little bit more about this in detail in the webinar that BRC did yesterday, the state of the market. You can find the recording on our website for that. But we spoke a little bit about how wind projects are dried up, and right now there's only solar left. So we do have supply. And for corporations to achieve their goals in Alberta, solar will play a really, really important role. But for that, like Jason mentioned earlier, policy clarity is really important. So we are hoping to get a little bit of that this year. Oh, yes, one more thing. I really recommend checking out our most recent report on our website. It kind of takes you through everything that's happened in 2025 in the space of renewable energy and PPAs. And if you would like to reach out to ask any questions, that's my email. And with that, I think we can move to the Q&A.
Wow, thank you both so much. That was phenomenal. If you want to take your screen share down, Margaret, we'll just have the three of us up on stage for this Q&A. Powerful information, depressing as all hell, but thank you for putting a few upbeat pieces in there. I know Jason going way back, and he's a very optimistic person, so it's kind of weird to hear him speak so pessimistically, but I think that's where a lot of us have been lately, so I'm not too surprised. So just a reminder to the audience, we're going to use the Q&A instead of the chat for this question period. So please make sure you're uploading your questions into the Q&A box, and also use the little thumbs up symbol to upvote people's questions, because we're probably not going to be able to get to all of them today. So we're going to really need to use that upvote function. All right, kick it off with a question from my husband, who I had a feeling would be joining us today since he used to work with Jason. Justin's wondering, do you know if there are any existing or proposed fossil fuel power plants in the zones where renewables are now excluded? I should say the buffer zones that Jason was talking about earlier, wind is excluded from the buffer zones. I think there are a couple provisions allowing solar if it's beautiful and whatnot. So not all renewables are excluded completely, I think. But yeah, just curious, Justin, is about proposed fossil fuel power plants in those zones. Who wants to take a stab at that? Jason?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, you're right. Heather, it is wind projects that are excluded. All other forms of generation are supposed to complete an assessment, a visual impact assessment, they're called, but it's not exactly clear what those, like how that assessment will be reviewed. So anyways, to answer the question directly though, there's at least one project, at least one large project, well over 400 megawatts, proposed in the Pincher Creek area, well within the no-go wind zones, very close to an area where a couple of wind projects have been canceled recently because of the restriction. But the other part of this that I think is important to note is just what is the overall context, right? Like, I actually, a third of Calgary might be within the no-go wind zone, right? So technically, I think the University of Calgary's gas plant is just inside the zone too. Mm-hmm. And we all know Calgary has a beautiful view of the mountains, but this only applies to wind projects, not to gas plants, cell towers, coal mines, forestry. So that's the part where we're seeing at Pembina Institute, at least, or where we're very concerned that these rules only apply to one type of energy development.
Mm-hmm. And the viewscape analysis, I always like that because we kind of invented a word here in Alberta just to discriminate against renewables. The viewscape analysis that is required also doesn't apply to things like McMansions and other types of development outside of the power realm. So I found that interesting when I think of developments as a whole in those buffer zones. I don't think we're forcing anyone to prove the beautiful scenic value of their other developments either. Thank you, Jason. That one just really gets my goat, just because, like, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? And there was probably a time in Alberta where people saw canola and they thought, gosh, that's so ugly. But I just find it gorgeous. And so too with a solar, when I see a solar farm, I'm just like, oh, it's so beautiful. And I can't imagine having to be the regulator who has to decide, is it beautiful enough though? I do not envy those folks. All right, question here from anonymous person. Will the development of data centers increase renewable energy demand? How will the government regulate solar farming as a result of this? Margret, you were talking about demand earlier, so I might go to you first on the AI question. And you mentioned we have some demand from the oil and gas sector. Were you analyzing demand from future AI as well?
No, that is a good question because that is something that we've been getting asked. And so the demand that we analyzed were from the top 100 Canadian companies from the Toronto's I'm having a Toronto Stock Exchange. That's what it is. Yes, TSX. That's right. There were a few tech companies, but I don't recall data center specifically. But the demand from data centers is something that it's been on our list of things to kind of look at as it's kind of growing right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because, when you are looking at if the 11 gigawatts had gone ahead, that has instead not gone ahead for renewables in Alberta, we would be able to power our whole grid. But then let's think about how much more we need that in the context of increasing demand for electricity, whether it's AI, whether it's the electrification of vehicles, the electrification of home heating. All indications are that we need more, not less, in terms of new power plants on the grid in general. Jason, anything to add there?
There definitely is going to be grid growth, as you said, and it's unfortunate that we're not seeing more wind and solar projects go ahead to fill that gap. We know from Alberta's experience and other jurisdictions around North America that, these are shovel-ready projects that, or at least, final investment decision-ready projects that will very soon become shovel-ready that can be built faster than gas plants, as we're seeing, where we're seeing a huge shortage in gas turbines, for example. One thing that folks are talking about in the US, but not so much in Alberta yet, is co-locating renewables with new data centers, right? Encouraging data centers and renewables facilities to be built right next to each other to speed up many processes, but in short, we have regulatory hurdles that don't allow that to happen very easily in Alberta. But
so we might lose out on a variety of different types of investment if we don't expand our grid here. Not just the solar and wind investment is what I'm hearing too. There might be other industry implications. Andrew has a question. Do we have a breakdown of how much of that 70.6 million comes from property taxes that would have been paid anyways versus taxes generated from renewable improvements to the land? Or is the 70.6 entirely generated by renewable developments? I think that's a question for you, Margret.
Yeah, it's just by the renewable energy developments. It's not property tax. It was interesting to work with different municipalities to calculate this, but it is just from renewable energy developments.
So essentially, you were looking at sort of corporate tax revenue, is that it, rather than property tax revenue from those developments?
I think I got it confused. We're looking at it's just the taxes generated from the renewable energy projects operating in that municipality. So it is I guess that is the property tax, yeah. And it's not due to repowering, or it's not any of the additional things that projects or industries would have to pay for just existing on the land. It's just the, yeah.
Because of the property value increase once you put it there. I see.
Yeah, if I could add to that, just looking at Margaret's work and some of her colleagues, these were places, counties in Alberta where they're really struggling with revenues, and having these new renewables projects like increased revenue, right? Just to be clear, to the point where, like Margret showed, so many of them are seeing huge proportions of all of their tax revenue come from renewables, and they're able to build new things, right? Like marinas, fix roads.
Yeah, there's a very global audience here today, and what they may not be aware of is in southern Alberta, we have very little water. And as a result of a lack of water, there are limits to what types of industry could go there. For example, AI centers probably couldn't survive there because there's no water. And so for people who are from out of province or out of country, when Jason talks about how those areas were hurting and didn't have that revenue before, part of that's due to that sort of drought. That's where Alberta gets a lot of drought. And so just important context, I think, for people who aren't familiar with that land. If you drive through it, you realize, yeah, not a lot could happen here. And industry and people are always fighting in the southern parts of Alberta over who gets priority for the water. Does it go to industry or does it go to residents, right? So there's a lot of tension in southern Alberta there. And so to have renewable industries down there that don't rely on water is quite a nice perk for many of the municipalities there that have trouble attracting businesses that would rely on water. So just some context there, because I noticed in the chat we've got a lot of folks here from out of province, so they might not be familiar with our land. Andrew has another question here. To be devil's advocate, how do we safeguard grade A farmland? I saw this firsthand in Ontario, farms shutting down food production to produce energy, which raises food costs on a holistic view. We see this with corn, ethanol subsidies distorting food production / security. And thank you for raising the ethanol issue, Andrew, because my understanding is that that would probably pose more of a significant risk in Alberta for food production than renewables. Also, just to add, there's some really excellent work done by Dr. Sarah Hastings-Simons from the University of Calgary, touching on how much food land would be necessary in Alberta to have a net zero grid. I think she calculated less than 0.1% or some hilariously small number. So we can get to net zero without good farmland here. I don't think we actually have any type 1 farmland in Alberta, or at least none that's classified that way that I understand currently. But if folks are interested in learning more about how land is classified in Canada, there is a link that I'm going to get my staff to pop in the chat about the different classes of land. Solar Alberta certainly does not advocate for folks to put solar on prime farmland. We would love to see solar on class 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, but not class 2. I mean, that's we don't want to compromise food security either. And I think not just when it comes to solar, we should be thinking about other types of developments too that we should avoid on class 2. My perspective, the greater risk is actually the encroachment of municipalities on class 2 farmland. Suburban sprawl is often causing a much greater risk to our food security here in Alberta than solar. But solar developers obviously should be aware of that as well. But yeah, we also have a video, and I think you guys mentioned it earlier, agrivoltaics and how you can combine solar and food production on the land. So I'm also asked my staff to pop a webinar about agrivoltaics that we did earlier this year in the chat. This features farmers in Alberta who are combining sheep and pigs with solar here in Alberta. So that's certainly an option for people wanting to develop on other classes of land. But yeah, did you two want to add anything on that farmland question there? And Andrew's devil's advocate, I appreciate it. Everyone needs to play the devil's advocate once in a while. Anything to add there, Jason?
I'd say just to build on what you said, Heather, I think all forms of development have trade-offs, and that's partly why Pembina Institute was founded. Actually, our original name is Pembina Institute for Appropriate Development, and to your point, even in a future where we have much more solar, it's projected still to be less land than golf courses currently take up, or gravel pits. Right, gravel pits. I learned in doing some background analysis for this topic is one of the biggest drivers of agricultural land loss in the province. Right. In addition to, like you said, suburban sprawl, other forms of land use, like the oil and gas sector uses 125 times as much land as the wind and solar sector right now in Alberta.
The question really is, if we're concerned about food security, which many of us are, why are we only discriminating against renewables in this department, right? And why aren't we looking at all forms of development? So that's really interesting, Jason. I hadn't thought about golf and all those other factors when it comes to food security. So, but definitely we want to reduce green on green tension. So Solar Alberta does have solar siting recommendations, and in there we do recommend that developers avoid good farmland, they avoid good wetland. We don't need to go there. We don't need that land. There's plenty of other land, but the challenges are not just that farmland piece. I think, Jason, you listed 6 or 7 different discriminatory rules and regulations that are coming in. So that's just one of many issues to tackle here today. So thank you for broadening our outlook on that. And thank you for the question, Andrew. Appreciate it when folks ask those tough questions. Let's see here. Oh, one thing on that note of farmland, I was researching what is the greatest risk to food security in Alberta. Guess what came up? Climate change. Climate change is the greatest risk to food security in Alberta. And guess what we need to solve that? A net zero grid. So I just thought that was really something we don't really consider a lot in the broader context of all the things going wrong for food security. All right, so another question here. Have you been seeing more projects of solar being implemented on buildings and above parking lots rather than grassland fields? Jason, I think your graph showed rooftop solar and how it continues to grow despite the stabilization of utility scale. We certainly touched on that in Solar 101 on Tuesday, so you'll be able to check that out on our YouTube channel. But anything to add there, Jason, in terms of rooftop and parking lot solar and how it's been growing these days?
Yeah, I guess I would say the total volume of that has surpassed about 400 megawatts. I think it's at 409 at the end of 2025. And I'm sure some other presentations might have gone into that more.
42,000 plus homes and businesses now with solar in Alberta. It's going up like 1,000 a month now. I think when your graph started around 2021, right? And at that time we were only getting about 100 new rooftop systems a month, and now we're getting about 1,000 a month. It's just amazing to see the growth there. So.
And I would just say there's still potential to do a lot better in Alberta. We can learn a lot from South Australia, which is a state, like a region in Australia, where it is sunnier, but up to 70%, like 70% of their electricity has come from rooftop solar at its peak. So it is possible to have a lot more and to reduce the installation costs in Alberta too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The demand that rooftop solar will have a tough time meeting is the demand, Margret, you were talking about, which is the industrial demand. Because rooftop solar is a phenomenal way to meet residential demand and need for solar, and you can even meet some of our commercial building carbon energy needs, I should say. But because Alberta has so much industry here, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do all our offsets with rooftop solar alone. I think, again, for folks out of province, they probably don't realize how much of our emissions comes from our industry. It's quite different from other provinces where a lot of their emissions come from their homes and businesses. Hey, do you guys have a ballpark figure for folks who are not familiar with Alberta, how many of our emissions actually come from industry, which would be a little harder to offset with just rooftop solar alone? I don't know if you have a ballpark there.
We probably should be, I feel.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I was like, it's significant, though. I do recall looking at some charts and saying, oh my gosh, we can do a lot as individuals here, but we're certainly going to need those solar farms if we're ever going to get to a net zero grid because of our industry, hey? All right.
Loosely, no one cite me on this. I know it's recorded, but loosely, at least a third of that.
Okay, it is very significant then. And I won't quote you on that, but thank you. I just knew your estimate would be better than mine because, of course, I was not ever regulating the oil and gas sector like you were. So, are oil and gas energy projects being limited in any way in any areas? I think you mentioned, Jason, that the buffer zones discriminate completely against wind. And then you have to do a viewscape analysis for solar, but you mentioned maybe also for oil and gas energy. Is that true? I thought it was just solar.
So gas power plants would also need to have an assessment. Again, not knowing what the criteria for what to do about those findings would mean. But yeah, with regard to other types of developments, we're not seeing the same type of legislation apply to those.
Like oil and gas wells or things like that, right? Okay.
Exactly.
They seem to be really just focused on the power plants and not thinking about any other developments at all right now, hey? I know a lot of people were saying, well, we've got all these orphaned wells, they're ruining the viewscape. And it seems like the province isn't really thinking about that in relation to the viewscape analyses, hey? All right.
Definitely not for the views. And of course, they have other rules too, but generally in our understanding, the rules for renewables have become a lot more restrictive than for that sector.
Yeah, and one thing I was surprised to learn in 2023 is this is the first time ever where the government of Alberta actually stopped development completely in order to develop new regulations for energy. Apparently, we've done numerous regulatory reviews for the oil and gas and other sectors, but we've never actually put a moratorium on development while undertaking those reviews. We managed to chew gum and walk at the same time when it had to do with oil and gas, but somehow when it has to do with renewables, we can't possibly chew gum and walk at the same time. We have to stop everything. So if I recall, that was the initial point of significant discrimination, was the fact that the government felt the need to just stop everything until they regulated the heck out of things. And so I think a lot of folks are saying, well, we're not opposed to regulation, but you can regulate and continue to develop your industry at the same time. And we actually have a long history of that here in Alberta, hey? All right, John's question here. How can we get Daniel Smith to stop making us lose out on future opportunities? What are some lobbying activities we could do to change this? So thank you for your question, John. I feel like I planted you in the audience. Please help with our lawn sign campaign, especially if you live in Southern Alberta or anywhere with a UCP MLA. Please order your Rise Up for Renewables lawn sign. They still matter in Edmonton too, MLAs drive through these parts as well. But definitely sending our template letter that's on our Advocate With Us section of our website. And thank you, Stephanie, for putting the links in the chat again. So do that advocacy work. It does make a difference. Remember when the coal mines first threatened to disturb the Rocky Mountains again in recent years? Cor Blund, he and others led these big lawn sign campaigns. They're having to do it again, of course. But they're fairly effective. The first time they did that, we really did see the government back off of their coal mining plans, and hopefully it'll happen again this time. But it sounds silly, but lawn sign campaigns really do impact government, and I've actually heard that from MLAs, just so you know. And they also say personal emails and letters are quite effective too. So that's why we always provide a template, and then we encourage folks to actually adapt it yourself and send it from your personal email instead of through just funneling it through the same website. So those are two ideas I have. Anything you guys want to add in terms of what we can do to get our premier on side and help us stop losing out on all these great opportunities?
Well, from our side, I guess it's what we do at Pembina and at BRC. I guess it's trying to make the benefits more tangible, like through the municipal tax revenue work, through the pledge to power, showing how there's demand and things like that. So I guess I guess like sharing our work might be helpful so that more people see the impacts, understand it, rather than, because that's happened to me as well, right? You're in an echo chamber, you hear certain things and you don't listen to, I don't know. It's just, so I guess sharing our work and amplifying that.
No, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I did note your report earlier this week announcing that Alberta had seen a 99% reduction in PAs in the last 2 years alone. Mm-hmm. And the first thing we did is we said, we better share this out. And I was disappointed to see that not more of our followers were pushing share on your links. So we did share it to our page. Find them on social media, BRC. Find Solar Alberta on social media, because we're sharing Pembina and BRC's solar related announcements anytime they pop up, because they're really powerful reports. And the more of us who spread the word on social media, the better. And I don't know if people don't maybe realize how much it matters when they just push that little thumbs up. It maybe because it feels like such a small act, right? But guess what happens when you guys push a thumbs up on all of our posts? The media calls, and then the media calls because they saw the thumbs up, and then you get more hits, and it becomes a nice virtuous cycle. And eventually you can break through to the other side of folks who might be in their echo chambers. So let's keep amplifying BRC and Pembina's work on this front. We're certainly trying to, and hope our followers will as well. All right, Mitch has a question here. Oh my gosh, we're getting close to 1:30. In case I missed it, what are we now predicting for 2026 for development and construction now that the moratorium is over and rules seem to be mostly clarified? Do we have any construction predictions? I mean, I know we have the queue, but it seems like a lot of those projects shovels just never hit the ground. So I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab on a prediction, because all my predictions would have been wrong in the last 2 years because it's been so depressing. Either of you want to take a stab at a shovel hitting the ground prediction for 2026?
Yeah, I can say quickly, unfortunately, not many projects. I hope a few still make it through. Some of the rules, like I said, that are still outstanding are substantial. For example, the question of if you're building a new facility, how much of the transmission that's necessary to get your generation to grid do you have to pay for? That's a question that used to be very clear. Ratepayers paid 100%. Now it might range from anywhere from 0 to 100%. And for someone trying to put a project proposal in, that's a really big question mark. There are a couple of other questions like that.
Not to mention we're competing, right, with Texas. I think you showed a graph. So Texas, their transmission policy, if I understand correctly, is a build it and they will come approach. So if they want you to put solar or wind in a certain part of the province, they'll build the transmission line out there to facilitate investment. And here we are, after all the natural gas power plants went in with ratepayers paying for transmission, now we're saying to wind and solar, now we're thinking you're going to cover that. So it's the contrast to the other jurisdictions where they're having these solar friendly policies and adopting increasingly friendly policies. At the same time, we're adding those costs. So we're basically going in the opposite direction if people are looking around. So Margret, you're going to add there?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And from the PPA perspective, I think everybody's waiting to get more clarity. And once that happens, like I mentioned, I think I'm not too sure if construction would happen this year. But if we get those rules if there's more clarity and folks start getting into PPAs, then probably in a year or two we can start seeing projects, but I'm not too hopeful for this year.
2026 might be another depressing year, but at least we're here together, in it together, and somehow being depressed with company is never quite so bad. And I know for myself personally, whenever I get down, I do look at that rooftop space and I see the growth, and I realize that the grassroots are with us. Albertans are with us. The government's not currently on side, but you just look at how our neighbors all around us, including in southern Alberta, in fact, especially in southern Alberta, are adopting solar like never before. And to me, that's a culture setting piece, and it will become, I think, less and less politically attractive to discriminate against solar and wind as people see more and more of their neighbors adopting solar on their roofs. So I'm hoping we can end on that slightly positive note, which is that the grassroots are there and they're changing. Just for context, this is our best attended solar show ever. We had more people at Solar 101 than ever before, Solar Ready Design than ever before, Optimizing Your Solar System, and today we had, I think, 260 registrations for your presentation today. So obviously Albertans are with us, even if our government is not yet, and they'll come along because at some point they're going to have to get back out in front of the parade that's already started. So I want to thank Margret and Jason so much for being so frank and honest with us today. We need to hear the honest goods, even if it's depressing, and for doing all your great work on your research that really organizations like Solar Alberta can't do. We are way too small to do the work that you do, and so we just rely so heavily on you folks for the deep dives and that extra layer of knowledge and understanding. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. This is our last public session for the Solar Show, so I just also want to take a minute to say a huge thank to our staff at Solar Alberta, to Sally, Julia, Katie, and Stephanie. They put in so much work for this event to take place this week, and they've done a phenomenal job of making it go. So thank you all very much. And of course, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Today's sponsor was Park Power, and we sure appreciate them and all our sponsors this week. So have a wonderful Thursday, and hopefully we'll see some of you on how to navigate utility scale solar tomorrow morning. Obviously, we need tips and tricks in this context if we're ever going to get shovels in the ground. So tomorrow's kind of the how-to on today's presentation. So hope to see some of you there, and thanks for a wonderful solar show.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.